Hey everybody, it is Monday, December 1st. You are listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu with you as we begin another month, Jill, the last month of 2025.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to, as we all come back from a long holiday weekend here in the U.S. Jill, how are you doing? We have to do a full week this week after a 3-day week last week.
Well, I was off Wednesday, as you know. And so I had a wonderful 5 days, a lot of food, a lot of family, a lot of fun. But I'm ready to get back into the routine. How about you? If this goes on much longer, I don't know if I'm going to fit into my clothes. I don't know what day it is. It was time to get back into the routine.
Right. We have like 2 real weeks left of the year, if that. But Jill, I just want to note one thing that went viral over the weekend. Between our Instagram feed and TikTok feed, 5 million combined views for the clip of J.D. Vance on Wednesday saying in a speech that anyone who says they actually like the taste of turkey is full of it. And it led to a whole number of debates. And I want to know where you stand on that, because we heard from many a Mo News follower this weekend.
I like turkey. I actually like turkey in some cases better than chicken. How's that?
Wow. Now, that is a controversial view. I think the point Vance was trying to make and others trying to make.
I know what he was trying to make.
Is that like, there's never like a day in June or April or July when we're like, it'd be great tonight. Let's roast a turkey. And I think that's his point, is like turkey, it's a tradition, yes. But ultimately, we never like sit there like, oh, for the barbecue, we're, roasting a turkey.
Do you like turkey?
I like the tradition of turkey. But there are several other foods I would prefer to turkey. I mean, to me, the turkey tradition is, it's an important tradition on Thanksgiving. But the other 364 days out of the year, I'm not like seeking out cooked turkey. I'll have like a turkey sandwich, like a deli sandwich. But I see where Vance is coming from on this. But I still, respect the tradition.
And just a bold statement from the Vice President of the United States ahead of a national holiday
where we all eat turkey. Yes. It was actually interesting. We did a poll on the Instagram page, and I asked, the following, the community, how they felt. And they landed about 40% agreed with Vance, 60% were opposed to Vance. But many of them who were opposed to Vance said, just on principle, due to their politics, they can't agree with J.D. Vance on something. So if we had just put the turkey poll out, I think we would have landed 50-50. But since it became political and partisan, I think that's where you sort of saw people, taking sides. Anyway, I digress, Joe. We have a lot of news to catch up on after a long holiday break here.
All right, let's do it. We are getting some new details about that targeted shooting of 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C. last week. Alarms had apparently been raised for years about the Afghan man who allegedly shot them, what we know, and how the Trump administration is overhauling asylum policies. To Venezuela, rising tensions as President Trump orders international airlines not to fly over the country. And there's a report that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered military members to leave no survivors in the first of those strikes on the alleged drug boats in the Caribbean.
This is a story that dominated headlines over the weekend, and it involved potentially multiple strikes, even if the military saw survivors on the boats.
And if you're listening to this podcast after a long weekend of travel, perhaps some delays and cancellations, well, you are certainly not alone. We're going to take a look at the Thanksgiving travel chaos and what we can expect this week as bad winter weather continues in parts of the country. Back to D.C., President Trump says that he'll pardon the former Honduran president who's currently serving a decades-long sentence in the United States on drug trafficking charges.
U.S. prosecutors had called for a sentence so long, Jill, that this guy never see the light of day ever again. We'll tell you what we think changed Trump's mind.
A scandal unfolding in Minnesota, where dozens of Somali Americans are accused of taking more than $1 billion in anti-poverty funds and social safety net programs.
Yeah, there's a huge headache for Governor Tim Walz there as he seeks a 3rd term as governor.
And Black Friday saw historic online shopping. We're going to take a look at projected numbers for Cyber Monday today. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
A huge day in civil rights history, Jill, as Rosa Parks refuses to surrender her bus seat.
All right, let's start with the latest on the National Guard shootings in Washington, D.C. last week. We learned more this weekend about the shooter, Raminallah Lakhanwal, a 29-year-old Afghan national. He arrived in the United States in 2021 after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and he was officially granted asylum earlier this year. The shooting and also some signs that may have been missed by both the Biden and Trump administrations over the last 4 years has been dominating the political conversation over the holiday weekend here in the U.S. Authorities say Lakhanwal opened fire on 2 National Guard members with a revolver just blocks away from the White House Wednesday afternoon, killing 1 National Guard and injuring another. The victims are 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom and 24-year-old Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf. Beckstrom died on Thursday, and as of late Sunday, Wolf is still in critical condition. They are both part of West Virginia's National Guard, which, along with a handful of other states, sent Guards people to support President Trump's crime crackdown effort. Lakhanwal now facing first-degree murder charges. He was shot on Wednesday by a 3rd member of the National Guard, and he was then subdued. According to some new reporting, he had a troubling mental health history long before last week's attack. Now, back in Afghanistan, Lakhanwal worked in a special Afghan army unit. It was known as a Zero unit that was backed by the CIA. So this means that he received specialized training, and he was part of a group that worked alongside American forces during that war, which lasted 2 decades. Zero units were also allegedly involved in possible war crimes and involved in some questionable and deadly operations. So then fast forward to 2021, which is when the U.S. military under President Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. And under the Biden administration's Operation Allies Welcome, Lakhanwal's family and about 76,000 others evacuated Afghanistan and came to the United States because of fear that they would be targeted by the Taliban because they helped the United States. So he resettled with his wife and their 5 sons in Washington state. All 5 of those sons are under the age of 12. He just officially received asylum from the U.S. government in April under the Trump administration. Despite that, the Trump administration pointing fingers at the Biden administration. So here is Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem on ABC yesterday talking about the vetting process.
Are you saying there was no vetting done by the Trump administration? You were simply relying on what had been done under the Biden administration? You did no vetting before granting him asylum?
The processes were put in place using information that was gathered during the application process that happened under Joe Biden, and that has been completely fixed.
So there's been a lot of reporting on this over the weekend. Politico had a very detailed profile painting a picture of a man who was clearly struggling here in recent years. They obtained emails from a community member to a nonprofit group that provides services to refugees who described Lakhanwal as suffering and struggling to assimilate in the U.S., unable to hold a steady job, commit to his English courses, and they described him as alternating between periods of dark isolation and reckless travel. He would even spend weeks in a darkened room, not speaking to anyone, not even his wife or older kids. He would actually have to send a couple of toddlers in the room because those are the only people he would respond to. One email from January 2024, so nearly 2 years ago now, described him as such. He has not been functional as a person, father, and provider since March of 2023. He quit his job that month, and his behavior has changed greatly. Apparently, he had some odd jobs in recent years. He delivered packages for a bit for Amazon at one point, but his last delivery was back in August. Now, community members said they were worried about him harming himself, but never saw any indication that he might harm anyone else. Of course, that had changed last week as he drove across the country from Washington state to D.C. and executed his ambush-style attack on the National Guard members outside the metro stop there, just a few blocks from the White House. Now, as of right now, investigators believe he acted alone, though they do believe that he was radicalized in the U.S., but a clear motive here not known at this juncture. And a reminder here, there was the vetting that took place as he entered the country in 2021, and then another round that he went through in 2024 into 2025. And those are the key moments that they're going to look back to here to figure out what exactly they knew at the time. And again, what was not sufficiently addressed, given that, again, there were these emails going around, Jill, as of more than 2.5 years ago that he wasn't functional anymore.
So Noam's comments come after President Trump said that he would permanently pause migration from, quote, third world countries after the shooting. He says the U.S. will also now re-examine all green cards that are issued to people from 19 countries, quote, of concern. However, the change regarding all 19 countries had already been under consideration before the shooting, and it includes countries like Haiti and Venezuela.
So within this group of 19 countries, that includes, of course, Afghanistan, you also have Burma, Iran, Libya, Yemen, Sierra Leone, Turkmenistan, and Somalia. So there are a lot of people to re-vet here, and we're still awaiting details on what exactly this will mean. But for now, asylum operations are frozen for all Afghans, and I imagine we will learn more as people come back from the holiday break here today and in the coming days. Now, as we mentioned, there is vetting that takes place, especially when it comes to asylum seekers. But there have been major backlogs in recent years. And then there was that surge in August 2021. You guys all remember those pictures. We covered it here at Mo News. The surge of people that came in during the Afghan withdrawal, in some cases, people who had worked for a long time for the U.S. government, and then those who were just, the strongest and most fit and able to make it onto those planes as people were running onto the runways there at Kabul airport trying to get out of the country. And so there was a big push. Interestingly, Jill, from Republicans calling on the Biden administration to approve these people who had fought valiantly alongside the U.S. military for 2 decades. And, we heard from a number of people who were trying to get their translators, other people who had helped them fight against the Taliban. And now the Taliban was in charge. So there was major concern there. At the same time, there were Republicans, among them a younger J.D. Vance, who were saying, whoa, we are approving way too many people way too quickly. And there have been subsequent reports that said that things were missed along the way here. So now the government appears to be committed to re-investigate and re-vet a whole number of people who came in. They're still trying to get a sense of how they do this, who they're doing this for, when those people came in, where they are in the process, if they already have a green card, what does it mean based on their citizenship level? So again, we'll be learning all the details on that, but there is pushback on this. There's a San Diego-based group called #AfghanEvac. They responded this weekend to the new re-vetting the government is doing by saying that the U.S. government is using a single violent individual as cover for a policy they have long planned, turning their own intelligence failures into an excuse to punish an entire community and the veterans who served alongside them. And that's important to note here. You brought it up at the beginning that, they're not really focused on what took place here with this guy's particular asylum claim, but they're saying instead we should look at everyone across the board, no matter what. And it all comes in the aftermath of that shooting on Wednesday. The government now committing to sending an additional 500 National Guard troops into D.C. in response to the shooting. They've been there since the summer, conducting what they call high visibility patrols. They don't have much of a mission there. Some of what they're doing, Jill, is simply on the National Mall cleaning up garbage at times. In fact, the woman who was killed, the National Guard member who was killed, had complained to her boyfriend that she hated the role initially. She didn't know why they were even there, but over time she grew fond of being in D.C. and in fact, sadly, had volunteered to be in D.C. over the Thanksgiving holiday so other people could take their holiday break with their families.
All right, now to Venezuela, where President Trump just took another dramatic step in his escalating showdown with Nicolas Maduro. On Saturday, Trump posted on Truth Social, telling all airlines and pilots to consider Venezuelan airspace, quote, closed in its entirety. The message was also addressed to drug dealers and human traffickers. So we got a bunch of questions asking if the U.S. president can legally close another country's airspace. And the answer to that is legally, no, but the implications were felt immediately. The U.S. as well, of course, the strongest military on the planet. You could see flight radars showing that planes were diverting around Venezuela. International airlines also quickly following the guidance. We saw something similar over Iran earlier this year, just ahead of the strikes there. By midday Saturday, hours after the post, a handful of commercial flights continued to fly above Venezuela. The Maduro government responded, calling Trump's move, quote, a new extravagant, illegal, and unjustified aggression against the people of Venezuela.
Interestingly, the Miami Herald has a report out on Sunday night that there was a phone conversation between Trump and Maduro in the hours before Trump called for the airspace to be closed over Venezuela. In that call, apparently there were conversations with Maduro about him leaving the country. Maduro looking for assurances that he, his wife, and his son could leave. Trump said, sure, but only if you resign on the spot. But then apparently Maduro was also asking for global amnesty for any crimes he or anyone in his group had committed ever. That was rejected. So a lot of interesting conversations happening behind the scenes here. Trump effectively issuing an ultimatum here to Maduro. It's become clear, and we've told you this on the podcast for a while, that it's not just about drugs here. They want regime change in Venezuela. Remember that effectively Maduro stole the election last year. All major observers from international countries found that Maduro lost the election. The group that was democratically elected includes the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize this year. And that is who the U.S. and other countries are looking to actually lead Venezuela, along with the people of Venezuela. But you have seen this huge military escalation taking place in and around Venezuela here. And so when we saw that threat, when we saw that warning, that call by Trump to close the airspace over Venezuela on Saturday, we all sort of assumed, even internally at Mo News, that something military was coming this weekend, because, it always happens on Saturdays these days. And yet nothing, at least as of this recording late on Sunday night, has dramatically changed yet. Trump appears to be giving Maduro multiple chances here to leave the country, even as about a third of the U.S. Navy, global U.S. Navy, now is in and around Venezuela. The Trump administration has formally labeled Maduro and his government a foreign terrorist organization due to its alleged ties to multiple groups, including the Cartel de los Soles. That designation could give the Pentagon more legal cover for strikes. Now, as for what these strikes could look like, it could be military, it could be leadership, it could be bases, air defense systems, facilities tied to Maduro's inner circle, also drug trafficking infrastructure, airstrips, cocaine labs, guerrilla camps. But keep in mind the majority of the drugs comes from a neighboring country, Colombia, not Venezuela. Again, there appear to be other interests here. Among them, Jill, Venezuela has the largest oil assets, known oil assets in the world. And that has been part of the conversation here as well. So we're going to watch the developments this week as things continue to be escalating here with Venezuela. But there's another report that got a lot of attention over the weekend. A Washington Post investigation finding that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly instructed SEAL Team 6 to kill everyone on board during the first military strike on an alleged drug boat back in September in the Caribbean. We've been telling you about these strikes. There's nearly 24 of them at this point. In the first strike, he instructed them to kill everyone, and apparently it meant multiple rounds of strikes. They discovered that there were a couple survivors after the first strike on a boat, and the U.S. commanders then ordered a second strike to kill the survivors. The Venezuelans saying that represents a war crime based on the UN Charter. We should note that even if it was an official war here, ordering the killing of all occupants who can no longer fight is something called showing no quarter, which would be a war crime. Multiple former military lawyers weighed in on this over the weekend, saying that effectively amounts to murder, that you're going back and killing people who can't fight on a ship that doesn't pose any immediate threat and can't really operate anymore. And a reminder that this is a country and individuals who are not in armed conflict with the U.S. Now, the Pentagon pushing back on this, Hegseth was pushing back on this, though they declined to address specific questions about Hegseth's order, whether there was an order for a second round there. They just spoke in broad strokes, saying the entire narrative here is completely false. Ongoing operations to dismantle narco-terrorism and protect the homeland from drugs has been a resounding success. But certainly this caught a lot of folks off guard and garnered a lot of attention from both Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill over the weekend.
Right. Lawmakers from both parties are looking into whether the strike amounts to a war crime. Bipartisan leadership of the Armed Services Committees in both chambers vowing to look into the matter. Senators Roger Wicker, a Republican from Mississippi, and Jack Reed, a Democrat from Rhode Island, promising, quote, vigorous oversight to determine the facts related to these circumstances. Some Democratic lawmakers are calling Hegseth a war criminal. They say that he should be fired immediately. But again, Republicans are also concerned. Republican Representative Mike Turner of Ohio said Sunday that, quote, if that occurred, that would be very serious. And I agree that that would be an illegal act. And Representative Don Bacon, who is a Republican from Nebraska, he said on ABC that if it's, as the article said, that, quote, it is a violation of the law of war. The campaign has hit at least 22 more boats and killed more than 80 people. But it appeared that the Pentagon changed its protocol after that first attack. Since that first attack, there have been a couple of survivors who were sent back to their home countries. And in the weeks following that first attack, the Trump administration notified Congress that the U.S. was in a, quote, non-international armed conflict with designated terrorist organizations.
Jill, it's notable that Wicker is involved here and some of these Republicans getting involved here, very concerned about that report if true. And so we expect some committee hearings and some oversight to happen on that in the coming weeks.
All right, time for the speed read from the Points Guy and AccuWeather. Thanksgiving travel came with some major disruptions, and most of the chaos centered in the Midwest. Airlines canceled nearly 2,000 flights on Saturday alone and another 600 plus on Sunday. A powerful winter storm swept through the upper Midwest and Great Lakes, dropping a foot or more of snow in some areas. Chicago O'Hare was hit especially hard. Nearly half of Saturday's flights were canceled. That's more than 1,000 in a single day. By Sunday, the storm had moved out, but delays and cancellations were still stacking up and could continue until today. In Des Moines, a Delta flight that was coming in from Detroit slid off the runway. That happened Saturday night. None of the 54 passengers or a handful of crew on board were injured, but that airport was closed Sunday until another runway could be opened up. And all of this, of course, happening during what's expected to be one of the busiest Thanksgiving travel periods ever.
Yeah, road travel wasn't much better either, especially with that weather across the Midwest and the Great Lakes area. Massive traffic jams. And then in Indiana, a 45 vehicle pileup on the I-70 on Saturday morning. Thankfully, no major injuries there. There were several more multiple vehicle pileups across the country over the weekend. Meteorologists say, though, the winter weather isn't done here. There's a second storm already forming, and that's going to stretch across nearly 24 states from Kansas to Maine as we head into the first days of December here. So look out for that. And it's going to bring the first snow of the season to a number of places.
From NPR, President Trump planning to pardon former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez. He was convicted for drug trafficking and weapons charges and sentenced to 45 years in prison. In March of last year, Hernandez was convicted in an American court of conspiring to import cocaine into the United States. It was lauded as a huge achievement. The investigation, arrest, and conviction took place over the first Trump administration and also the Biden administration. Hernandez has been appealing his conviction as unfair and serving time in a prison in West Virginia. So Trump wrote on True Social Friday that, quote, according to many people that I greatly respect, Hernandez was, quote, treated very harshly and unfairly. Hernandez had served 2 terms as the leader of Honduras. It's a Central American country with a population of about 10 million people. So he led that country from 2014 until 2022. He was extradited from Honduras to the U.S. 3 years ago after the Justice Department filed 3 drug trafficking and firearms-related charges against him.
So many people shocked by this move, Jill. One famous quote that was used at Hernandez's trial, he had boasted in a meeting with drug dealers that he was going to shove the drugs right up the noses of the gringos, referring to people in the U.S. and across North America. This was lauded as a huge, huge achievement. Getting Hernandez into the U.S., getting convicted, was considered one of the big successes in 30 plus years. He had moved more than 400 tons of cocaine through Honduras towards the U.S. During his time, receiving millions of dollars in bribes that he then used to fuel his rise in Honduran politics. U.S. prosecutors saying Hernandez effectively, quote, paved a cocaine superhighway to the U.S. using the police and military to guard drug shipments. Now, Hernandez always denied the charges against him, claimed that many of the witnesses were drug dealers seeking to reduce their own sentences and were out for revenge. But at the same time, there were a number of connections brought up during the trial, Jill, including receiving bribes from the Sinaloa cartel that was formerly headed by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. The prosecutors actually asked the judge in the U.S. to make sure that Hernandez would die behind bars, citing that he had so many connections to violent traffickers and the unfathomable destruction, they called it, caused by the cocaine that he had pushed towards the U.S. So we're still awaiting details on all of this. Now, there have been some Trump allies, some people on the far right who have taken up Hernandez's cause, among them Roger Stone. You might have heard of him. He has been big on Hernandez's cause here, which may or may not have led Trump to offer him the pardon here. But there are a number of folks, again, Democrats and some Republicans, who are concerned about this. And it comes in light of the fact, well, we just told you in the podcast, and we've been telling you about Venezuela, that, the big push from the administration is to, cut down on the amount of drugs coming to the U.S. And so as we talk about a potential war against Venezuela, partially predicated on stopping the push of drugs, you then, in the same weekend, have the pardon or the announcement of the intention to pardon Hernandez, who was convicted in a U.S. court of pushing huge amounts of drugs into the U.S. It does come as Trump also endorsed in the Honduran presidential race. We're watching the election results overnight on Sunday. It is effectively a five-way race. The person he endorsed, Nasri Tito Asfura, happens to be in the same party as Hernandez, the far-right party there in Honduras. Based on polling, it didn't appear like he had the lead going into this weekend. Trump did say that if he doesn't win, the U.S. might cut off support for Honduras. So definitely getting very involved there in another Latin American election and situation. And we'll watch the results from Honduras here in the coming days and hours, and also look for more details on what exactly went down behind the scenes here leading to this pardon.
From the New York Times and the City Journal, over the last 5 years, federal prosecutors say more than $1 billion in taxpayer money has been stolen from Minnesota social programs. Everything from free meals for kids during COVID to housing support to autism therapy. So far, about 60 people have been convicted, and a lot of the fraud is being tied to Minnesota's Somali American community. It has become one of the largest state-level fraud sprees in recent U.S. history. Under the Democratic leadership, the state passed some of the most generous welfare programs in the country, and now this massive fraud has the governor, Tim Walz, and fellow Democrats in some hot water as Republicans hope to block Walz from a third term in 2026. Republican Minnesota House Speaker Lisa DeMuth accusing Walz of raising taxes while letting, quote, fraud run wild. That was in a video announcing her bid for governor. As for this scheme, it involved fake invoices, fake clients, or totally fake companies billing the state for services that never happened, and then using that money for luxury homes, cars, and overseas real estate. For example, Minnesota's Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services program. It was launched in 2020 to help seniors and people with disabilities or addiction issues stay housed. It was supposed to cost $2.6 million a year to run, and instead it blew past $100 million by last year. In August, the program was scrapped, and since then, federal prosecutors have brought charges against people that they say built purely fictitious companies solely created to defraud the system. And it was just one of a whole list of similar schemes that extend well beyond fraud during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's so interesting here, Jill, because this report first came out in the City Journal, which is a more conservative magazine, just over a week ago, and the New York Times then followed up on it. So you've seen sort of a right-leaning publication dive into it, then a left-leaning publication dive into it, and it raises broader questions here about Minnesota's Scandinavian modeled system of a robust safety net bankrolled by high taxes. It is an environment that drew in some of these migrants, including the Somali refugees who came in after the country descended into civil war in the 90s. And a large share of the people who were implicated in these fraud schemes come from the Somali immigrant community. It's about 80,000 people in Minnesota. Most of them are now citizens, and they're an important Democratic voting bloc in the state. At the same time, you now have people in the community saying, these are a few bad apples and they shouldn't be used to paint the entire community with this brush. There are allegations here, they haven't been proven yet in court, that some of the money that was used here or that was gained or defrauded from taxpayers ended up back in Somalia and then ended up going to groups like Al-Shabaab, an Al-Qaeda linked terror group in Somalia. That is something that's still being investigated right now. And so there are security implications here. There are potential legal implications here. There are societal implications, and there's political implications because Tim Walz, who many of us were first introduced to when he became Kamala Harris's running mate, happens to be running for a third term as governor right now. So he's facing a lot of backlash here, lacks oversight on all of this. One thing that he said was that he believes he erred on the side of generosity during the pandemic, and that now, he's looking into what happened here. For a lot of people in Minnesota who say, there have been signs of this for a while. It's too little, too late. And there's a sense that, Minnesota has become too tolerant of this sort of thing, is so open, so geared towards keeping an eye on the weak that it became a prime target here. Folks noting that in Somalia, there was a culture of, very corrupt government. So the idea of stealing from a corrupt government, was considered to be no issue at all. And some people, or at least the people implicated in the frauds so far, sort of brought that philosophy with them.
And finally, from NBC News, Americans spent big this weekend. Black Friday online sales hit an estimated $12 billion. That is a new record, according to Adobe Analytics. And that is a more than 9% jump from last year. Online traffic was busiest between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. local time nationwide, when sales reached $12.5 million every minute. The software company Salesforce is putting its Black Friday estimates even higher, with total online sales at $18 billion in the U.S. and $79 billion globally, meaning it's not just us crazy people in the U.S. that are doing this, Moshe. It's everyone.
Black Friday is big, Jill. I've been to many foreign countries where they advertise Black Friday and, with no connection to Thanksgiving whatsoever.
The e-commerce platform Shopify is saying that its merchants brought in a record $6.2 billion in sales worldwide on Black Friday. The top categories were cosmetics and clothing. In-store shopping also is up. Friday's retail sales, excluding cars, rose more than 4%, according to MasterCard, stronger than last year's 3.4% growth. In-store foot traffic also rose more than 1% compared to last year. Demand was reportedly strongest for clothes and jewelry.
When you look at some of the numbers here, remember they're not inflation adjusted. So once you take into account that we have about 3% inflation, there's still growth, but just not as significant. We're spending more because things are more expensive. Once you take out the inflation, we're still spending more, just not at astronomical sums here. And some of the economists that were talking about this over the weekend also say that it's not equal. It's not across the board here. They describe, and we've told you about this before, what they say is a K-shaped economy, that we're not all moving in unison here. So it's the higher earners that are spending a lot more, while they see signs that lower earners are actually spending less money this holiday season. So the higher income folks are making up for the decline when it comes to the lower income folks. So that's a trend line we're going to continue to watch through the holiday season here. But, we're going to get numbers here probably as soon as tomorrow, probably by Wednesday or Thursday, just how much was spent here, because we're talking about projections of $11 billion on Saturday, $14 billion for today, for Cyber Monday. Remember, it's Cyber Monday, which was like a thing at the beginning of the internet. Now we're all shopping online. So I know that there are some sales out there, but we've all been the online shopping, Jill, we've been doing since probably the beginning of November, because I feel like the whole month now is full of sales, and they begin super, super early.
Moshe, I'm doing it as we speak.
I have felt you a bit disengaged from the podcast as we tape. Like, what is Jill have multiple tabs open here? Jill, among those that the National Retail Federation expects collectively to be spending $1 trillion this holiday season. So we will get a better sense of the economy, winners and losers, who's doing best among retailers and also among consumers here, because, of course, just the massive amounts of money that are spent this time of year. All right, now time for On This Day in History. We should first note that today is World AIDS Day. It is a day that was first held in 1988 to mourn those who died of AIDS, honor efforts to contain the epidemic, and raise awareness among the general public. More than 44 million people have died from HIV-related causes globally since the beginning of the epidemic. But at the same time, we have seen some huge progress when it comes to medications. The big challenge is getting those to some of the poorest parts of the world that are most afflicted by the disease. On this day in 1913, the world's first moving assembly line debuted, used to manufacture Model Ts at a Ford factory in Michigan. The innovation was the idea of owner Henry Ford, and the assembly line revolutionizes the auto industry along with a number of others. On this day in 1955, Rosa Parks refuses to surrender her bus seat to a white passenger and would be arrested for that, breaking the segregation laws in Montgomery, Alabama. It would spark a more than 1 year bus boycott led by a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. And on this date in 2020, South Korea passes a law to defer military service for K-pop stars who have elevated the country's cultural influence around the world until the age of 30. They have mandatory enlistment in South Korea, but of course, K-pop, very big. So they changed the law on this day 5 years ago to ensure that members of BTS, that the BTS group would stay intact. I guess the member Jin was about to turn 28. And so they didn't want to break up the group at that moment, though. Eventually members would have to go on and serve their time in the South Korean military.
I remember reporting on that story in real time. And K-pop, even though it was big, it was not what it is now in the United States. K-pop Demon Hunters, and just in terms of how mainstream it has gone.
Jill, I grew up in the Chicago suburbs with a whole number of Korean friends who introduced me to early K-pop in the 90s. So like this is like 20, almost 30 years ago, K-pop. There's a group called HOT and a few others. So I consider myself like one of the, most early noticers like of K-pop in America, but downloading it on Napster.
Conveniently mentioning it for the first time ever on this podcast.
Well, I have proof. I have proof of
we've
myself.
Done. We're
K-pop.
3 years in.
I have proof of going to an HOT show in the Chicagoland area in the late 90s.
All I'm saying is that we're almost on our 1000th episode, and we talk music and 90s music in almost every episode. And first we're hearing of it, people.
Jill, I have a lot of stories to share, and I'm just trickling them out over time here.
Or else why would everyone keep listening, right?
Exactly.
We've heard them. We've heard the Seinfeld, the hip hop.
You miss a day, you miss a lot. I got stories, and sometimes you trigger memories, and you just triggered one with that story.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. Those reviews really matter.
Good luck this week, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow.